Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you the mistakes I see beginners make time and time again. If you're a beginner, you're probably, in fact you're almost certainly making at least one of these mistakes. I don't pretend for a second that a video is a substitute for a good teacher. If you can afford a good teacher, I recommend that because they can give you immediate feedback and stop you forming bad habits. Consider this video therefore a supplement, or if you can't afford lessons, then this is a great way of making sure you don't slip into forming those bad habits. Stick around to the end because each point becomes more and more relevant as you progress. First of all, make sure you're holding the pick correctly if you're even using a pick. There's lots of ways to hold this, so I can't say there's only one way or that every other way is wrong, but for most people, this is the best way. I'm holding the pick between my thumb and my first finger only. I'm not letting my middle finger near it. Also, what I'm doing is my thumb is out like that, my pick is 90 degrees, forming a kind of L shape. My curled finger is coming in like this, and look at that, there's very little pick showing. It gives me a lot of control. And I'm using the side of my finger, not the fleshy pad of my finger. And again, that stops this middle finger from getting involved. When you're strumming, you can have your hand in the air. But when you're picking single notes, you really want this hand resting in the same way that you would rest on a piece of paper when you write to give you more control. And it gives you a reference point so that you don't have to look at this hand as much. So you keep your hand resting. Now there's different ways you can do this. You can rest this squidgy muscle here, this squidgy one here, this gap. Basically think of a horseshoe there. You can rest any part of this, but not all of it. Let me show you why. If I say rest my squidgy thumb muscle here, I'm not touching the strings, okay? If I rest the whole of the palm here, I'm now muting the strings. I might want that effect, but sometimes I don't want that. In which case I can open my hand up at the back here, or I can open it up here like this. Just make sure you're resting somewhere. You should be able to feel the bridge under your hand. If you're playing an acoustic guitar, you can either feel the bridge or even the wood here, as long as you're resting your hand somewhere. I now don't need to look at this hand. I can feel where it is. This brings me to the next point. Stop looking at your picking hand. You might have to a little bit at first, but get into a habit of looking at the one that's doing all the work and all the movement. This hand's got a lot of distance to cover. This hand, not so much. And I see this time and time again. Beginners are fixated on the hand that's making small movements. I want you to rest your hand so you know where it is. Trust it. If it makes mistakes, that doesn't matter. You've got to kind of learn a kind of braille method here. You feel where the strings are and eventually it becomes second nature. And then you can focus your efforts on the hand that's doing all the work. The next mistake is people have the neck of the guitar far too low, sometimes even pointing down. That creates a lot of stress on your wrist when you're trying to get under things, especially like bar chords or anything stretchy. Get the neck elevated. There's different ways of doing that. With a guitar strap like this, where the neck stays where I want it, or I can use a footstool, like this one, under my left or my right foot. As long as that neck is elevated. I actually like to have my guitar strap unfashionably high, so the neck's nice and close to me, and if I stand up, the guitar just follows me. The next mistake I see is where people have their fretting hand in the wrong place. You need your finger right up against the fret, but not necessarily touching it, just behind it. If you're too far away towards the headstock, say here on the 3rd fret, kind of buzzes, it sounds awful. If I bring it towards me, the note's clear, and I don't even have to press very hard to do that. There are, of course, compromises to this. If I'm playing lots of notes at once, let's say a chord of A that looks like this, I cannot get my first finger any nearer to that fret, so I have to press a little bit harder. But with practice, that will come anyway, and as the calluses build up in your fingers, you'll find that you don't have to press as hard. The next mistake is one that the more progressed beginner will make. It's where you get a dead sound like this, and people often go straight to looking at this hand. I don't know why they blame this hand, because it's almost always this hand when you're a beginner. So make sure this hand is not leaving the string before this one's even picked it. Sometimes when you're in a hurry to get to the next note, you subtly don't even know you're doing it. You actually leave the note as you're still picking it. Make sure this one is pressing into the wood and then move when the note is finished. Don't always blame this hand. Sometimes this one's leaving too early. The next mistake is a subtle one, and it's not one that just beginners make. I see it with slightly more advanced players as well. They push the string like this, and they let go when they're picking. We are not trying to launch an arrow from the string. You want to minimize the amount of time you are in contact with the string for a couple of reasons. The first reason is it takes too long to do this. Push, release, that's 2 motions. We don't want push, release, push, release. We want to just clip the string. The other thing is, if you're pushing the string and releasing, and you're repeating that note like this, you'll end up with a very staccato or shortened set of notes. You'll get where you're going stop, pick, stop, pick, stop, pick. We don't want that. We want to just clip the string. Pretend that that string is molten lava and you do not want to hang around on it. The next mistake is holding the neck like a baseball bat. Sometimes it's okay to be a bit lazy and wrap your thumb over the top. If it's good enough for Hendrix, it's good enough for me. But what we don't want to do is always have the thumb there, because it reduces the amount we can stretch that hand. This really becomes a problem if you're playing something stretchy, like say bar chords. When you're playing a bar chord, if your hand is up against the neck like this, your fingers now want to be up here. The only way to get them back onto the neck or fingerboard is to curl your fingers in, and I've lost all my stretch. If I just simply drop my palm away an inch or two like this, the stretch in my fingers has come back. I've got these lovely big spaces here. I can easily reach my bar chord. Okay, so keep your palm away when you're playing anything stretchy. The next mistake I see is where people use too much of the pad of the finger rather than the tip. Most of the time where we can, we use the tips of the fingers. I know it's a smaller target, and that's why you want to use the pad of your finger, but try not to. This is what happens when you use the pad of your finger. Can you hear that? Lots of strings are ringing out at the same time. I don't want that. I want the fingertip. This is also a problem when people play chords. So take a chord of D, for example. Instead of using the fingertips and getting a nice clear chord, people kind of flatten their fingers and you get these choked notes like that. The next mistake I see is one where people do hammer-ons incorrectly. Let me show you what hammer-on is first. I can play a note and then play another one on the same string by simply hammering my finger onto the string. This is what I hear from beginners. The note dies. And the reason is, and they think that they've got to do it really fast to get the note out. It's not about speed, it's about hammering decisively. So I can hold the note for ages and then do it, and the note still comes out. First of all, I'm using the fingertip, remember, not the flat bit, but also I'm hammering my finger, I'm not placing it. People are so worried about missing that tiny target that is the string. They do this, they place their finger so slowly that they choke the note. You need to decisively hammer that note on. This next mistake might seem like an obvious one, but people simply don't practice enough. By that I mean they don't practice regularly enough. I would rather you played little and often than waited 2 weeks and then did a binge practicing session. Don't binge practice, well you can, but as long as it's regular. Just make sure you do something, preferably every day. I can tell if I haven't played for 1 day. In fact, there's a saying, if you don't practice for 1 day, your teacher knows it. If you don't play for 2 days, you know it. If you don't play for 3 days, your audience knows it. So I nearly forgot to add this one to the list. When you're picking, try and get into a habit very early on in your progression of using downs and ups. We call this alternate picking. We're alternating between a downstroke and an upstroke. You're going to have a preference initially for downs or ups, but try and get into the habit of doing both. Otherwise, you'll always want to pick in the same direction. Finally, the last mistake is you haven't clicked like and subscribe yet. Make sure you do that so you get updates about when I release another video that will make you a better guitarist. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.